Hey, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, then hi, my name is Erica, and in this video, I'm going to be doing a rebuttal to a YouTube video I recently watched, and I'm gonna read the title of it because if I'm not mistaken, it's a long title and I want to get it correct. Don't play the video. But the video is called Sue, My Son Shot Up Columbine Klebold, and it is by somebody named Timmy 2 cents. Now, first I want to give a bit of background. If you don't know, Columbine was a site of one of the worst mass shootings and basically the one that kind of put mass shootings in our lexicon in America. It was a tragic event, and yeah, there's no way around that. But Sue Klebold is the mother of Dylan Klebold, who was one of the Columbine killers. And in this video, Timmy 2 cents makes the argument that this is the worst TED Talk ever. Now, I take a few issues with this. My first issue is the assertion that it's the worst TED Talk ever, because I've seen some pretty bad TED Talks in my time, so I'm sure I could find one that's worse. Right now I can't think of one off the top of my head, but while I'm editing this video, I'm sure I'll be able to find something that's not good. But one of the first arguments Timmy makes, and of course my dogs start fighting the second I pull out the tripod and everything, which is why I've been recording in the kitchen, so my dogs don't do this. But one of his first arguments is that Sue Klebold has nothing to teach us, since she's asserting that none of this is her fault. I also want to add that I just rewatched Sue Klebold's TED Talk. I watched it a few times a few years ago, but I rewatched it for the sake of this video, and I realized something. Timmy left out a bunch of parts where Sue does take accountability, and she does say that she feels responsible. That being said, she can't undo anything. I really don't know what Timmy wants from her. And I'm not a Sue Klebold stan. I'm not white knighting for her. I'm just saying, these are things that are difficult. It's not easy to spot things like that, especially in the late 90s when this wasn't a big topic of conversation. Now it is. Now we think about it like every day, because you can't go to the mall or the movies or a festival without worrying about this shit. But back then it wasn't thought about as often. I don't know if Timmy did this accidentally or if it's intentional, just trying to mislead the audience. But I will say, adding those clips would have added necessary context to it.
It has taken me years to try to accept my son's legacy. The cruel behavior that defined the end of his life showed me that he was a completely different person from the one I knew. Afterwards, people asked, "How could you not know? What kind of a mother were you?" I still ask myself those same questions. Before the shootings, I thought of myself as a good mom. Actually, this sense of failure that brings me here today. Aside from his father, I was the one person who knew and loved Dylan the most. If anyone could have known what was happening, it should have been me, right? But I didn't know. Today I'm here to share the experience of what it's like to be the mother of someone who kills and hurts. For years after the tragedy, I combed through memories, trying to figure out exactly where I failed as a parent. But there are no simple answers. I can't give you any solutions.
Okay, first of all, I don't think Sue Klebold ever said, like, I had no part in this. But what she is saying is she really didn't have any way of knowing her son was gonna do this. And whether you believe that or not is up to you. But I do think we do have things to learn from what she has to say because we don't get that a lot of times. Parents of people that commit atrocious crimes don't often then become public speakers and talk about it and what it's like and
reached the highest level of cope, and I find her statements both counterproductive and insulting to rational parents and society at large. Because when you learn all the facts about the case, who Dylan was, the mountain of evidence showing Dylan and Eric's plan, it's hard to imagine why Ted would ever allow her anywhere near a stage and a microphone. Sue is the parent of one of the most deranged children that has ever walked Earth, and without an admission of error, she has nothing to teach us. The fact
yeah, so I do think he has things to say. He also then goes on to talk about how TEDTalk disabled the comments on that video, which I'm gonna go on TEDTalk's page right now, but what I will say is I don't know if they do this on all their videos, but on many of their videos I have noticed they do not allow comments.
High growth for all schools.
Well, they do.
How were people responding to the talk? I went to the comment section, and of course, the comments were disabled. And Ted opted to remove the option to downvote the video.
On this video, they're making a liar out of me. Well, they do sometimes allow comments, but I've also seen in many of their videos, including, I believe it's the still young, the late disability activist, they disabled comments on that video. So it's not just something to do with Sue Klebold and TEDTalk conspiring to protect her, which although Timmy never said that in his video, I do believe that was where his train of thought was headed. I could be wrong.
Thought experiment. You are a complete narcissist. Your evil child and his best friend just tried to kill everyone at school. What do you do next? Pin most of the blame on the other killer. Blame society, gun control, bullying, mental health awareness. Secure victim status for yourself. Or all of the above.
And throughout the video, Timmy calls Sue Klebold a narcissist. Now, I don't know how everybody seems to forget that my dogs are fighting behind the tripod. George, relax. I'm trying to have a serious conversation. Oh my God. I'm trying to have a serious conversation. Hey. But, narcissistic personality disorder is a real disorder in the DSM, and I believe the term narcissist is thrown around way too often in our culture just to mean someone that you think is full of themselves or they're not in touch with reality, when that's not what narcissism actually is. And I don't think it's fair to just slap a label on someone when you read their book and watched their TED Talk and you're like, oh, she's a narcissist. I don't appreciate that. And I think we would all be better off if we would stop throwing around labels like that and instead said, I feel like she's a bit egotistical and is making this all about her. And if Timmy had said that, I might say, okay, fair. In some ways I do agree with that, and in other ways I don't. But then we can have an actual argument instead of being like, she's a narcissist. My next point is that he's saying Sue Klebold is making herself the victim when what happened had to do a lot with her. And what I will say, and my mom has always said this about things, so I guess that's where I get this perspective from, is that the family members of someone who commits a terrible crime become victims in and of themselves because they lose that person they had, but also they kind of lose a sense of identity and they're not able to speak up because it's like, how could you have not seen the signs? It's your fault. I do believe that Sue Klebold herself is a victim in this scenario. Not only did she lose her son, but she has to come to terms with the fact that her son has committed these awful acts. And whether or not she's come to terms with that yet or not, I'm not sure. I'm not in her life. But that's a lot to come to terms with. And I think it's really hard for us to judge unless we've been through it. And I'm not saying I've been through it. Luckily, I have not, knock on wood. But I do imagine it being very traumatic and just changing your life forever and how you see things. I think a lot of people also do this when they find someone unlikable, is they're like, oh, they're not a victim. Just because you don't like someone doesn't mean something wasn't traumatic for them or they're not a victim. You have to remember, she didn't commit the crime. Whether you think her parenting caused this crime to happen or not, that's another story. But she herself did not commit this crime, so she is not a perpetrator. And I feel like she's being treated as such, and that is not fair. Even if you don't like her and you think, oh my God, she's insufferable, she makes everything about her, it's still, in this instance, she was a victim. She lost her son. She basically lost her whole sense of self. And she has to deal with this for the rest of her life, that the kid she raised did that.
1999, Columbine happens. All four parents, the Klebolds and the Harrises, go into hiding. The Harrises make it known that they will not speak unless they are granted immunity. We've never heard from them, and it's now been 24 years, so we'll probably never hear from them.
I also want to say that one of the arguments he makes is that the Harris parents, which were the other parents of the other perpetrator, have not gone on the record and have not done like a press tour. And I will say there are different ways people cope with things, and there's no blueprint and there shouldn't be, to be like, oh, if this happens to you, this is what you do, and if you deviate from this plan at all, you're a bad person or you're doing this wrong. She's chosen to speak out and they haven't, and both are, to me, they're, sorry, I just got an email and I got scared because it said respond ASAP, which I will after I'm done with this video. But there's no right way to go about this. the next thing I wanted to say is, he says there's no real way she could have raised him right if this happened. And it's like, you don't know, you were not in this household. You did not witness her parenting. She could have been a great parent. She could have been a terrible parent. I have no way of knowing either way. But that's why I'm not going to make these big, bold statements of, oh, she was a terrible parent and that's why this happened. Also, like, nobody really brings Tom Klebold into this, and I know it's like, well, he's not the one with a TED Talk and a book, but I mean, he still has, and I took my mic off, so now I'm gonna hold it for the rest of the time, but he still has gone on the record and talked about it, even if not as publicly as Sue Klebold has, but he still is part of this. Again, she didn't commit any crimes here. Even if you don't like her, she didn't harm those people. Her son did. And whether you think she's partially responsible or not, she still didn't do it. So to hold her accountable as if she did that is unfair. I think a lot of the big issue I have with this video is that he's mad that Sue Klebold is basically like, there was no way for me to have known this. And he wants, and I mean, I'm assuming he wants, I'm not in his brain, but from where I'm sitting, I feel like as a human being, we're always looking for these answers. We always want to have closure and be like, oh, okay, it was because of this or because of that, when sometimes there are no easy answers.
I comb through memories, trying to figure out exactly where I failed as a parent. But there are no simple answers.
Maybe she had no way of knowing. And I know Timmy makes the arguments that, like, it was found that there were, like, pipe bombs that had been reported and she didn't do anything about it. And yeah, I do think that's a red flag. But everything else, the underage drinking, to me that's not really a red flag. A lot of people do that and they don't commit atrocities. And also, even like the robbery and stuff, a lot of teens do that. I'm not saying it's okay, but that is a very normal teen thing to do, unfortunately. But yeah, I don't think there was an easy answer, especially at this time. You have to remember, even though there were mass shootings that had occurred before this, it wasn't really on people's minds. So they didn't know what signs to look for because people didn't really think of that as being plausible and have to know people that would do that. Whereas I feel like now as a country, we're all much more like aware of that and thinking, oh, is this a sign of that? Could this be a thing? And yeah, so I don't think it's fair to be like, oh, she has nothing to add because she didn't see this coming. So if she went on the record and said, I saw this coming and I did nothing, you would hate her even more. I can tell you that. Again, plenty of kids show red flags. There are plenty of kids I went to high school with that threatened to bomb the school because they wanted to get a day off. And luckily they did not actually do that. But, and I don't want to make light of this because it's not a light situation, but just because there are red flags doesn't mean you can like commit somebody or jail them or do anything. There aren't easy answers here because there are tons of people that can exhibit these red flags but not do anything. And just because you think they're scary doesn't mean they're a danger. And I think that is why this issue is so nuanced and there is gray area.
And in 2020, Randy Brown released a book titled The Inside Story of Columbine: Lies, Cover-Ups, Ballistics. Randy had a son who was friends with Dylan at one point, and he knew the Klebold family personally. This is a home videotape of Dylan in Randy's home, and this is a picture of Randy's son Brooks with Dylan. For clarity, Randy's wife is Judy, and Randy specifically references Sue Klebold's book in this passage. I read it, and I was really upset. It was not the truth. There, plain and simple, it was not the truth. She makes light of the warnings that Judy gave her about Eric Harris. Judy told her that he was dangerous and to keep him away from Dylan. Judy warned her very clearly as a friend. Sue ignored her. Sue was warned and chose to ignore it. Randy also...
Like, again, another thing I take issue with is Timmy saying she should have kept him away from Eric, the other perpetrator of this, because she knew that together they got into trouble. Anybody that knows anything about teenagers knows the more you try to keep them away from something they want to do, the more they're going to gravitate towards this. She had no way of keeping them separate. That's ridiculous. And I get what Timmy's trying to say is that she knew that together they were like a very toxic duo, and if she wants to believe that Eric was responsible and Dylan had just followed, then why didn't she separate them? I do get that. I get that train of thought, but at the same time, what was she gonna do? Lock him up in a tower? It's a very difficult situation, and again, it's hard to judge. And I don't think any 40-minute YouTube video can simply give us answers, just like I don't think one TED Talk or one book can. I think things are more complicated than we want them to be. And as people, we have issues with that. And even if she were to try to keep them away, teens hide things. Teenagers sneak out and they do things without their parents' permission. You can't really just be like, oh, you're forbidden from seeing somebody. Okay, that's it, my job's done. That's not how teenagers work. I know because I am currently mentoring a teenager, and while this teenager is lovely, at the same time, I do realize teenagers have a mind of their own and they're gonna do what they want to do, even if you give them advice or you say, please don't do this, they might continue. Again, I want to ask what Timmy thinks could have been done about the red flags. Like, give us concrete answers, because right now you're just like, oh, keep him away from Eric. Okay, well, he could have still done it on his own, and I know Timmy might say to this, well, Sue thinks that Eric was the problem and not Dylan, so if that's the case, that would have solved it. But I think we all know that this was a lot more complicated than that. And in this case, I do think Sue is in the wrong for just being like, oh, Dylan was a good kid, it was Eric who's the problem. I think they were both very, very, not even troubled. Troubled isn't even the right word for this. But they were bad kids. And not bad kids like, oh, bad kids, he robbed 7-Eleven. No, like, they were shitty, evil people. And together, they did shitty, evil things. Now, do I think that's Sue Klebold's fault? No. And do I think it's wrong that she's in denial all these years later, saying that, oh, it was mostly Eric? Yeah, but that wasn't even the main crux of Timmy's argument. If that was, I would have been okay with that. But then he throws in all these other things about not seeing red flags and how she's a terrible parent. I just want to add here, no matter what, we should not be blaming anybody in these situations except the perpetrators. Anybody around the perpetrators, we don't know what we would do in that situation. So it's easy in hindsight to be like, oh, why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you say anything? But unless you're in that situation, it's really hard to say. And the only people responsible for this are the people that did this. And to hold everybody else accountable is not fair.
That we blame everyone surrounding Sue, but don't hold her accountable at all as a parent. Sure, there were people who have spoken out about Sue, and I'm happy to add my name to that list. However, if you look around, you'll find plenty of people rushing to her defense. I think what is going on here is that people think about their mother or their child, and they insert themselves into the narrative. They can't imagine their child doing something evil, or they think of Harry Potter's step-parents or something and conclude that Sue couldn't have been that bad. But the problem is, nobody is claiming that Sue beat Dylan in a basement dungeon. It's just that she was a bad mom. And I'd argue that she doesn't have anything to teach us because she's not willing to give us the full story. We would never let the police or the school administrators do a TED Talk about how they couldn't have known about Eric and Dylan because we know that they failed. This is Robin, a naive girl who liked Dylan. She had just turned 18 and was convinced to buy a few guns for Eric and Dylan. Watches this major news network grills her because she had gifted a gun to Eric and Dylan.
And Timmy even makes this point about how the news were basically giving this woman, Robin, the third degree, who dated one of the boys and helped them buy guns. And he said it's not fair that she was treated like that by the news. And I agree. But I also agree that it's not fair for people to treat anybody who isn't the perpetrator as if they are.
At all, that they were so interested in guns and that you were going with them to purchase more. Was there anything that worried you?
I didn't really have any reason to believe that they would do anything with them, you know, that they would commit such a crime. I didn't have any idea that anything was going to happen. And so, I mean, they were just guys that I knew and hung out with and had fun with, and I never could have seen it coming, so it didn't seem like there was anything wrong with it.
Expect a high schooler who just turned 18 to be sensible and have insight into what Dylan was going to do, but we don't hold the parents to that same standard.
And then he goes on to say she admits in her book once she had a fight with him over him forgetting Mother's Day, and she pinned him up against the fridge. And he's like, see, that's an instance of violence. And yeah, that is. But then he goes on to say that this shows she's a narcissist because narcissists get mad when you forget their birthday and things like that. And again, I think that is a ridiculous.
Finally, Sue consistently gaslights the audience and cherry picks what she wants the audience to think about her to shape a narrative. There are numerous examples. One that sticks out in my mind is when she tells a story about how Dylan forgot Mother's Day one year. That spring, we had the worst argument we ever had during his lifetime. It happened on Mother's Day, the last Mother's Day we had together, and it still hurts me to remember it. I can't remember exactly what set me off. I was heartstruck about a disastrous year I'd had with both my kids, angry about Dylan's continuing negativity and bad attitude, and quietly hurt he had forgotten Mother's Day. When I confronted him about his attitude, I had this feeling he was responding not to me, but to some inner joke. It seemed disrespectful. Fed up, I got in his face, I shoved him against the fridge, pinning him there with my hand. Then I waved my finger and gave him a real mom lecture. I didn't yell, but there was authority in my voice as I told him he had to stop being so crabby and selfish. The world doesn't revolve around you, Dylan. It's time for you to think about other people in this family. You need to start carrying your weight. Then I reminded him he had forgotten Mother's Day. Finally, in a soft voice that carried warning and power, he said, "Stop pushing me, Mom. I'm getting angry, and I don't know how well I can control it." Even though she's trying to spin a narrative, she can't help but reveal who she is in these stories. It's very strange she doesn't pick up on the violence in this situation. You almost miss it if you don't pay attention carefully. Sue is seemingly unaware of how violent Dylan was. He threatened that he might not be able to control himself if she doesn't back off. And she admits to pushing him up against the fridge in the beginning of the confrontation. I have a hard time believing that this is how the dispute went down or that this was the worst fight they ever had. But it's interesting that she chose this as the worst example, because to a narcissist, forgetting birthdays or Mother's Day is a big deal.
This argument to make, I will agree with him that that's violent and that's not okay, but yeah, I just really don't like that he makes this argument that she's a narcissist.
She found a way to get attention and admiration when most would never dare. Sue's hairdresser was interviewed shortly after the shooting.
But Dee Grant, Susan Klebold's hairdresser, saw her just days after the shooting. She had no idea her son
She had no idea. I asked her if she had any idea. And she did say no, I did not want to pry.
I just find this odd. Even if Dylan had just committed suicide, harming no one but himself, I can't imagine getting my hair done in such a short proximity to the tragedy.
And then he goes on to say a few days after this all happened, she got her hair done. And he's like, I don't understand why anybody would do this. For a lot of women, getting their hair done can be therapeutic. It's not just about vanity, but some people have friendships with their hairstylist or other people at the hair salon. It's something a lot of men don't really understand, but for a lot of women, that is just a time to unwind and talk to people. I mean, it's not for me, but I know a lot of people who it's like that for, and that might be the case with Sue. It might not have been like she's like, oh, I need to get my hair done because I need to look good. It might have been, oh, well, I made this appointment already, so why don't I just do this? People's lives don't stop the second something bad happens. It's really hard for us to condemn people for the way they deal with traumatic situations when it's like that. People love to do that to other people and be like, oh, well, you're not a real victim if you do that. And it's like, no. Anyway, I just want to say that this video had some good points, but ultimately it was derailed by a bunch of nonsense, in my opinion, and in a way, and I struggle to say this because I know this will turn a lot of people away. In a way, I think it's kind of misogynistic that we hold her to such a standard, but it's like her husband, we don't really talk about him, and I know it's like, well, he didn't have a TED Talk, and true, but at the same time, if we're gonna say she's a terrible parent, so is he.
Columbine happened for many reasons: poor mental health, the toxic school environment, easy access to weapons, a lack of police and school response, and most importantly, terrible parenting. There, I said it. Sue Klebold was a terrible mom, and I don't say this to demonize her. One of the reasons I make videos is to provide a perspective that I think is missing in the discourse, and this video serves that purpose. I think it's a huge misstep to let someone like Sue, a complete failure of a parent, coach us on mental health and suicide. She didn't see it then, she doesn't see it now, and she has nothing to offer us. Sue Klebold, you lose. Good day.
And the last thing Timmy said before ending this video was, you lose. So to me, that kind of trivializes everything you say. This isn't a game. People don't win or lose. You don't have to like Sue Klebold, and it's apparent Timmy doesn't. But at the same time, to be like, oh, well, you lose, you're an awful person, takes away from any valid arguments you made. And again, I do think there are some valid arguments here hidden under the drama and ridiculousness. So yeah, I know this isn't a clear-cut video of everything he said was wrong, but again, that's kind of the point I'm trying to make, is real life is nuanced. It's not, oh, he's wrong, she's right, or she's wrong, he's right. There can be nuance here, and I think that is what was missing from Timmy's video, and hopefully I added some nuance and I'm not just wasting my time here. But anyway, thank you for watching. If you learned something, please give this a big thumbs up. Again, this is not a hate video towards Timmy. It's more of just a rebuttal, me saying, okay, I watched this video and here are my thoughts. But anyway, thank you, and if you have not already and you would like to see more of my content, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye.